A problem with America can only be resolved by letting that country hold us to ransom. That is the view of Iran's leader when it comes to negotiations between Iran and the West, particularly the U.S. Making those comments in an address to a group of Basij force members, he also said or pointed to the enormous voice of the nation that rang out earlier this month during pro-government demonstrations, stressing that enemies are trying to dominate minds and influence the world public opinion through spreading lies and fake news. Just some of the topics we'll be covering in this edition of The Spotlight. But first, let me introduce our guests. Kevin Barrett joins us. He's an editor at Veterans Today who joins us from Madison. Also joining us is Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author. Welcome to you both. I'd first start with you, Kevin Barrett. Iran's leader's address was received and was done at a forum where it consisted of the Basij forces, which are affiliated with the country's Revolutionary Guards. At the same time, they have been at the forefront of dealing with these rioters. And the sacrifice made by them was something that Iran's leader applauded, saying, quote, "You saw in these recent matters that the people of Basij sacrificed themselves to prevent the nation from succumbing to the force of a group of what he called rebels who were illiterate or enslaved people. And they sacrificed themselves to prevent the cruelty of another." The important role that they played is something that is not highlighted in terms of preventing, obviously, these security breaches, to say the least. How do you view those comments made by Iran's leader on the Basij forces?
Well, this is something that most people in the West don't know anything at all about, and they don't understand that there are many, many millions of people in the Basij forces who are dedicated to upholding the Iranian constitution that makes Iran the world's first Islamic republic. And this group it's got a lot of different facets. It's got social welfare elements. The Basij people are also running educational institutions and doing education and working on all kinds of interesting projects, infrastructure and so on. And then they also are a sort of line of defense of the Islamic Republic. And here in the West, where it's sort of taken for granted in the mainstream media, which is largely dominated by the Zionist enemies of Iran, that Americans are supposed to support some kind of regime change in Iran, it's not understood to what extent that there is this big, well-organized base of support for the ideals of the Islamic Republic. And it's also not really recognized to what extent the relatively marginal forces opposing the Islamic Republic are in fact guilty of treason, in the same way that here in the United States, if we had groups that were taking money and weapons from other countries to try to overthrow the Constitution of the United States of America and put an end to the United States as a democratic Republican experiment and instead turn us into a monarchy or a dictatorship or what have you, I mean, that would be the highest form of treason. And likewise, these Iranians who are trying to undermine their Islamic Republic are traitors. And fortunately, they're in a small minority. And there's, of course, a broad segment of opinion in Iran that's just people trying to get by in life, just like everywhere else. But the Basij group is really they're the forces, the boots on the ground. They're the popular group that's mobilized in support of the revolution. And they're probably the single biggest impediment in the path of these regime change plans that are coming out of Washington.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what Iran's leader has said regarding the riots. Marcus Papadopoulos, he said some are telling us in the newspapers, on the internet, that in order to put an end to these troubles, all you need to do, which started a few weeks ago, he said all that is needed is to resolve your problem with America and listen to the voice of the nation. But he has come out and also said that negotiating will not resolve anything, and that resolving our problem with America can only be resolved by letting that country hold us to ransom. That ending statement there is what is being highlighted. What do you think the relevance of that is? What was he trying to say there, Iran's leader?
For the sake of Western audiences, let me say the following. Iran has been maligned, indeed demonized by America for 43 years because ultimately in 1979, Iranians from all walks of life came together to liberate Iran from the yoke of American and British tyranny, which had, amongst other indignities, plundered Iran's national resources and had violated Iranian cultural and spiritual values. The problem in the West, specifically in America and in Britain, is that people in the aforementioned two countries view Iran through a Western prism, like how they view Israel through a Western prism. When I say to ordinary Westerners in person that Iranian soldiers helped to liberate Christian towns and villages in Syria from the control of either ISIS or Al-Qaeda, these people stare at me gormlessly. Indeed, no different to when I say to the average Westerner that during the conflict in Syria, the Israelis treated wounded Al-Qaeda fighters in Israeli hospitals. Again, the average Westerner whom I say that to looks at me in a gormless manner. So that really is a lesson in human psychology and demonstrates the extent to which the average person in the West has been brainwashed when it comes to Iran. Now, concerning the speech given today by Iran's supreme leader, yes, I agree with him. There is no reason as to why the Iranian government should sit down and negotiate with the Americans. It will not pay any dividends whatsoever. The most important thing for the Iranian government is to do what it has been doing for the last 43 years, developing Iran's economy, providing jobs and homes and salaries and pensions and a welfare state to the Iranian people, and of course increasing Iran's military capacity to protect the Islamic Republic. Other than that, as I said, there is no reason why the Iranian government should sit down with the Americans. After all, the Americans for 43 years have been posing a knife to the throat of the Iranian people.
Well, Iran's leader has said there, Kevin Barrett, that if we were to look at the negotiations, these riots that have occurred in the country is part of the pressure campaign that the West wants Iran to compromise on a variety of issues when it comes to the negotiations. And he talked about some of which there are some deadlocked topics. For example, the U.S. wants Iran to abandon its nuclear program, change its constitution, restrict its influence to inside its borders, and to close its defense industries. So you're pretty much stripping a nation out of everything. And he says even if that's done, it's going to keep going into different demands and wanting different concessions from Iran. So pretty much saying that negotiating with the West is really not appropriate. How do you view that approach by Iran's leader? Do you agree with it?
Yes, I think the leader is right. Just as he was right in the past when he expressed skepticism about the JCPOA when it was being negotiated. He did allow the negotiators to make their best faith effort to reach an agreement, but he never really had faith that that was going to solve the problem. And that viewpoint was borne out by subsequent events after Trump tore up the JCPOA, completely shredded it and violated it. That showed that the leader's skepticism had been warranted. And today, of course, even stronger skepticism is even better warranted. We're seeing this regime change effort against Iran as the West, well, specifically Washington and Tel Aviv, with some help from London, are mobilizing every kind of force they possibly can to attack Iran through every means other than a declared war. They're arming, paid separatists and terrorists. They've already been arming terrorists for a long time. 17,000 Iranians have been murdered by these terrorists, especially the MEK, which is now a fully West-supported, Washington-supported group. But now they've really gone all out. And then these demands, of course, are ridiculous. Obviously, Iran is not going to completely disarm and not have any kinds of relationships with its allies in the region. That's ridiculous. Iran is the largest and, well, it shares with Turkey, I guess, the status of really the largest and most potentially important sort of geopolitical entity in the region. And because Iran is fully independent and sovereign, unlike Turkey, which is still, it's working at it, but it isn't quite there yet, Iran has a huge role to play. And this notion that Iran is going to just fold up its tent and sort of disappear is completely absurd. So the leader is absolutely right. There's no point in negotiating with these lunatics who are mounting this unsuccessful attempt to overthrow your country and overthrow your constitution through violence and terrorism and lies. So you just have to outlast them. And that strategy has worked so far, and it should work even better as we reach the end of the unipolar American empire and the rise of a new multipolar world that Iran will play a very important part in.
Marcus Papadopoulos, you talked about the way that the West views Iranians and Iran as a whole. And also, I believe you touched about that being a result of the way that the media has actually played a hand in that. Now, one thing that really stood out in this media landscape is what happened just yesterday when we take a look at the win that Iran's team had against Wales, where you had these Saudi-funded, for example, TV station or a media channel by the name of Iran International, where they were demanding Iranians not to celebrate. They said you should not celebrate. They were telling them what to do, in other words, and that this was wrong, what happened. Of course, critiquing the Iranian soccer players and the team for participating in the World Cup. They even went as far as that. But the mere fact that they're demanding Iranians showed the true face of their, in a sense, as the word or the phrase has been thrown about, sinister plot by them in order to try to nail their version of how things should be. Doesn't that just reveal how low they have come in terms of trying to push their ideologies onto Iranians?
Well, as an overview, football, like other sports, is now in the vanguard of Western foreign policy. The World Cup is being used by the Western ruling elites to push for changes in countries such as Iran, countries which pursue an independent foreign policy and which do not bow down to the diktats of Washington. That is how sad the situation is, that the Western ruling elites have politicized sports. They have politicized the Olympics. Indeed, let me go one step further. The Western ruling elites have weaponized the World Cup, and they have weaponized the Olympics. The BBC football commentators were referring to the Iranian national football team as the, quote, regime's football team. And after the match between Iran and Wales, BBC journalists were attempting to ask political questions to Iranian national football players. Politics and sports, as any level-headed person would know, should be kept absolutely separate. But as I said moments ago, sports is now in the vanguard of Western foreign policy. But if we apply the logic of the BBC, who are attempting to ask political questions to Iranian football players, then why were American sports people and British sports people not asked political questions by the BBC or CNN or the Daily Telegraph or Channel 4 News about Britain and America's war against Serbia, or Britain and America's invasion of Iraq, or Britain and America's support of terrorists in Syria? Because if you're going to ask Iranian football players such questions, then of course the logic should be applied to British sports people and American sports people. And for the record, I do not believe that British sports people or American sports people should be subjected to political questioning.
Indeed.
But again, it shows the sheer how low the Western ruling elites have fallen to when it comes to persecuting Iran. And let's be very clear about it. Iran and the Iranian people are being persecuted by the West.
Well, the West is also not covering the news if they were to be impartial, which they're not, Kevin Barrett, when it comes to an issue like the pro-government rallies that took place. We saw that it was in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, that showed up when there was, for example, security personnel that were martyred in Isfahan, for example, or when you had the former spy den, as we call it, of the former U.S. Embassy, which we refer to as the spying den, of which you saw hundreds of thousands of people, not just showing up here in the capital, but around Iran. Those types of protests where there was a large presence, was not covered by the media. In particular, of course, either the Saudi-funded news channel or the state-funded, UK state-funded BBC. Again, this is part of that shaping the image in a different way by the media. How would you rate their efficiency if that was their goal?
I think the Western media has discredited itself to a great extent with its increasingly biased and tendentious coverage of so many issues, including these issues that are of special importance to the Zionist masters of Western media, such as trying to neuter Iran, which is the last major country that's standing up for the Palestinians. And so the Western media already has shot itself in the foot so many times that it lost the power to prevent someone like Donald Trump from becoming president. Now, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump by any means, but it's interesting that he won the U.S. presidency in 2016 by attacking the mainstream media. And the reason that worked for the first time in American history, prior to that, whenever the media went all out against anybody, they were finished. That happened to so many candidates for so many offices, including presidential offices, but it doesn't work anymore because so many Americans have awakened to the fact that mainstream media is dubious. So by going too far on these kinds of issues, I think that they are undermining their own credibility. And although the sort of rough agreement with these kinds of perspectives that they put out there in these kind of sneaky ways that sort of unconsciously infiltrate the minds of the viewers is it's still somewhat effective in terms of creating a general vague impression of what's going on. What they end up doing is manufacturing support that is proverbially a mile wide but an inch deep. And this coverage of the World Cup and that these, it has been so anti-Islam, right? Hating on Muslim countries that have Muslim values, that don't allow for hooligans to get drunk in the streets and beat people up, and that don't allow people to celebrate bizarre sexual and gender ideas. This kind of all-out propaganda that we're seeing, including against Iran, by completely suppressing coverage of these massive demonstrations, mourning the people that have been killed by these terrorists who are trying to overthrow the government of Iran, and on the contrary, on the other side of things, grossly exaggerating the people, the size of the group of people that is working against Iran. All this kind of propaganda does in the long run is undermine the credibility of the media itself.
Sure. Israel, as Iran's leader referred to there, Marcus Papadopoulos, the usurper Israeli regime, is something that he said is in line with policies by the West, particularly the U.S., to have domination over the West Asia region in particular. And the question that I have is, that has been in overdrive, and it's been like that for quite some time, vilifying Iran, creating Iranophobia, especially within the regional countries. We know that the U.S. has pushed Persian Gulf Arab countries to normalize ties with Israel, and they're vilifying Iran in order to have that unity and include, and for Israel to be part of that. Of course, it's not really been that effective in a matter of speaking, because not all have agreed to it. But do you think that's something that is working or that is not working to the way that they want it to?
Well, Israel is the main conduit for American power in West Asia. So one is not surprised whatsoever that Israel is one of the leading countries in attempting to overthrow the Iranian government and return Iran to how it was prior to 1979, namely a vassal state of the West. But I do believe that Iran is experiencing an increase in attempts by outside forces to weaken it, to subvert it, and to destroy it. And I am of the firm opinion that that is on account of Iran having a strategic partnership with Russia, and also on account of the war in Ukraine, because the West via NATO is waging a proxy war against the Russian Federation, and Iran is a firm supporter of Russia and has shown sympathy for Russia's reasons for having militarily intervened in Ukraine. So it follows, therefore, that the West, in an attempt to weaken Russia in Ukraine, is attempting to weaken Iran at home, with the objective being as follows. If the Iranian government is overthrown and replaced by a pro-Western puppet one in Tehran, then Russia will lose a friend and ally of immense value, which can only weaken its position both at home in Russia and also in Ukraine. That is why I believe there is an increased effort at present by the West and its regional allies in West Asia, including Israel and Saudi Arabia, to weaken Iran.
Do you agree with that, Barry Grossman?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Kevin
absolutely.
Barrett. Sorry about that. Kevin Barrett.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's obvious that the U.S. has chosen to try to fight Russia, Iran, and China all at the same time, which from an American imperial perspective probably isn't a very good strategy. Normally you try to divide and conquer. So the American empire should be trying to be friendly with one of those three at least while beating up on the other two, or better yet, be friendly with two while beating up on one. But they're so arrogant that they think that they can attack all three countries at once. And obviously, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians are not interested in being defeated and are going to be working together to prevent any one of them from being defeated. So the U.S. has driven these three critically important centers of resistance to the unipolar hegemonic world order together and turned them into a de facto alliance. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, has gotten stronger and stronger. And interestingly, this whole proxy war on Iran that we're seeing now developed. It actually began the day after Iran joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Obviously, that is not a coincidence.
Very well. We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Kevin Barrett there, editor at Veterans Today from Madison. Thank you for your contribution. Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author from London. And with that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. From Mikhail Tabwe and the team, it's goodbye until next time.